Hi everyone, so time for case building is up. So please prepare for your cases and such. I'm just making sure that everyone is near their devices. Is proposition here? Can you open your camera and give me a thumbs up? Is opposition here? Opposition? So
we are here.
All right, so hi everyone, welcome to the quarterfinal round of NSDC 2020. On side proposition, we have the team from Bali. On side opposition, we have the team from Jakarta. My name is Bobby Ongkojoyo. I will be your chair for this round. I'm from Ubaya. On our panel, we have Jen Sanjaya from Universitas. From Unpar, we have Muhammad Firman Syawalina from Unhas, we have Rizky Akita from Undip, and we have Upi Abdul Rahman from ITB. So before we start up, please ensure that you insert your name and speaker position in the chat box so that we can insert the ballot. Also, please ensure that you state your preferred method of POI before you start your speech, and please for everyone else to follow that particular preferred method of POIs in their respective speeches. After you're done positing your name, we're definitely going to start. Opposition is done. Can we have from the team names and stuff from proposition?
Can I just like say it or should I write it?
I think it's better if you write it just so that we don't forget. Right, that being said, we can start the debate. I call upon the first speaker of side proposition, here.
I'm audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Cool. Right. I'm gonna set my timer first. I'm really sorry. If there is any POI, I prefer by unmuting yourself because I won't be able to see the chats as I'm speaking. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. COVID-19 is a really new pandemic that a pandemic only occurs in like 100 years or so. It has killed millions and millions in the status quo. And the fact that women are able to manage these cases successfully, unlike other strongman leaders or even casual leaders such as Trump or Xi Jinping or whatever, they cannot manage their cases in their own countries successfully, right? This is a momentum of feminist movement to celebrate and validate the narrative of women, of how women are actually better, so that the narrative of patriarchy will be easily eradicated in the end of the day, because this is a huge issue and this is such the right momentum to prove that women is actually better, right? We will validate the narrative, we'll start a conversation in the status quo of how women's action is actually better than men. A little disclaimer before I start my speech. In this debate, we need to be a reasonable third-person view. We need to justify whether or not our support or validation of the narrative is going to be empowering to the feminist movement in the end of the day, right? I'm going to talk to you about 2 things in my speech. Firstly, how this validation is the right momentum, especially inside the pandemic itself. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how our validation will look like. Okay, moving on to my first argument about how this is the right momentum in the very first place. Let's talk about how the COVID-19 outbreak looked like. this is a huge new issues for the human being, for the world, right? This is a pandemic that only occurs for 100 years or so. It is really, really hard to manage because this is something that is very unique, and it is really hard to actually have the solution right now, because it is really a really, really rare occurrence, right? The fact that women are actually able to manage it is a really huge thing, and it is the best to celebrate it. Why is this true? Firstly, for far too long, women have been oppressed historically, and even in the status quo, women have been oppressed and discriminated. How does it look like? Firstly, women are being seen less. They didn't have education in the past. They don't even try to tap in a high position in ratio to men in the current status quo. Why is this true? Because men, for far too long, men is validating the narrative that woman is less. That woman needs to stay at home, needs to take care of the babies, needs to cook for lunch, and so on and so forth. This narrative has been stuck to the woman's mind until now. That's why they're scared to even tap into a high position, become a CEO and whatsoever in the current status quo, right? And secondly, women are afraid. They're afraid to go out of their houses. They're afraid to go to school. They're afraid to walk on the lanes. They're afraid to get catcalled, or for instance, getting raped, right? It is very hard being a woman in the current status quo. Lastly, pregnancy and even period. It is less likely they're going to be hired, just because they will have some excuses that they will never mitigate from themselves, because biologically it is inherently women's problem, right? So historically, and in the status quo, even biologically, women suffer more than men. And the fact that they contribute to manage to such a huge thing, to mitigate something like COVID-19, not many leaders are actually able to do it in the current status quo, proves that women are not afraid anymore. Women are not less anymore to gain such a high position, and prove they can mitigate such a complex problem that society's trust does not solve in the end of the day, right? Secondly, let's talk about COVID. In COVID-19, people are dying. People are in the hospital. So many people are in the hospital. They're dying. They demand for hope. They demand for changes, because currently so many government are not doing the right thing to mitigate the cases in their country, right? The fact that some countries that are led by women are actually succeed, this will put more trust in women in the current status quo. Because they can manage such a high position, they can manage to create such a solution that even solve or mitigate such a huge and complex problem even men can't do, right? What does it mean? What are the outcome for these reasons, right? Firstly, it will slowly eradicate patriarchy. This will create a new spotlight that the flaw that men leader are not always a good leader. So what does it mean? This means that people will vote based on people's performance, not just because for far too long men has already become the best leader historically, right? People will vote based on their policy, based on their performance, and people will put more trust in women in the end of the day. So they won't see any gender gap in voting. Secondly, women will be more empowered. They should be brave. They should be brave to even tap to a high position, no matter how painful pregnancy is, no matter how painful the fear of being catcalled on the street is, and so on and so forth, right? This eradicates the thoughts that woman is less. This eradicates the thoughts that woman needs to stay at home, women don't deserve such a high position, and so on and so forth. This is very aligned with the feminist movement in the end of the day. Woman needs to be equal to men. Women deserve to have an equal, even mindset such as men, so they can be as equal in position, right? So before I move on to my second argument, is there any POI? Okay, so how are we gonna actually validate this movement? I'm gonna talk about several things. Firstly, the fact in the status quo that Trump denied COVID, far-right strongman leaders also do. They are in a very advanced, superior country. They are not even able to mitigate these cases fully because they are too consistent for their state in the current status quo. right? The amount of cases in these countries are very huge. They should be able to at least mitigate, but they're very reckless in the end of the day, right? The fact that there are people who are able to manage this, which is a view, right? Some of them are actually women, proves that women is actually better and become more progressive in the current status quo. They're able to adapt, even to take risks, even though they don't want to be seen as inconsistent in the current in the current status quo, right? It is okay for them to take risks for their decision. At least they can cater to face their real life problem, unlike Trump, for instance, who denied COVID in the end of the day, right? Their position will be seen as valuable, especially when they are women. Maybe there are women in parliament, maybe there are women as CEO, but that isn't rare anymore, right? But women who can mitigate such a huge problem is actually very, very rare that they can bring such a huge change that this moment is very historical in feminist movement, right? That is why we should validate and celebrate it. How does it look like? Validating women leaders are actually, for a fact, better than men. This will create a conversation that women leaders aren't as bad. Men leaders are also creating mistakes. This is likely because they will start a conversation of why is all the list is full of women. Women are not gonna be seen as bad anymore, and men leaders are gonna have more check and balance in the status quo. That is why we're really proud to propose.
We thank the first speaker of Side Proposition for that amazing speech. A reminder for future speakers to mind their time and ensures that they will not speak above the expected times, since the adjudicator will not take any note if that is the case. That being said, I call upon the first speaker of Side Opposition to continue this debate. Here.
Wait, let me set the paper. All right, if you want to POI, you can just unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah, you can just unmute if you want to POI later. I'm going to start the speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, what we have to understand is that feminism isn't about women being superior to men. That is not feminism, ladies and gentlemen. That is called misanders. This is something that's a wrong perpetuation and a wrong kind of perception towards what the feminism movement is. Worse, we're going to prove why these kinds of narratives are only going to create more discrimination the moment men actually feel that this is discriminative towards them, the moment that their characterization about patriarchy being so bad, the moment men feel offended, for example, they're going to create more counter-narrative. That's going to this debate is that we wouldn't support that these women leaders are better in managing the COVID-19 outbreak. This doesn't mean that we don't appreciate that these women actually have achievements. We see that, yes, these achievements are great, but we don't want to endorse the narrative that is because they're female leaders, for example. That's why, for example, they can achieve better things. What kind of narrative that we support is that everyone can achieve the same kind of achievement. Everyone, regardless of their gender, can actually become better leaders, can actually become people that's actually good. Just as how the feminist movement wants to perpetuate that equality doesn't mean that women is superior to men, men is not superior to women. Proposition has to defend a world where the narrative is that woman is continuously better, or only woman is the one that can fix these issues, and when men actually cannot fix or cannot actually create betterment towards this issue. What is the kind of narrative that's going to happen? The woman is going to be seen as three things. First, they're better leaders because they're humble. Second, because women are accepting to science. And lastly, because, for example, they have diverse viewpoints. These are the kinds of narratives that exist because it is like the inherent nature of women and all those things. That is what the kind of narrative that they're going to perpetuate is better because of that. Moving on to my rebuttals. Firstly, they talk to you that this is that the success of these leaders is something that's very good. We should credit that. We should validate that. Your responses to this. What we have to understand is that the success of this leader is not only contingent on the ability of this leader to run that country. Understand, just like Jacinda runs in New Zealand, right? We see the reason why in New Zealand COVID-19 cases are low is because people is educated about this issue. So for example, in the future, if there's, for example, a BLM protest, then the people would be accepting towards these things. So it's not inherently only because the leader is a woman, but because there are also other factors that support. This is why we shouldn't glorify that this is only because it's a woman that's going to become better. And our mechanism, moving on to my second rebuttal, they told you about discrimination, and currently women have always been oppressed, all those things. Look, being oppressed, first of all, doesn't justify you to oppress back. But secondly, they never told you why this is the exclusive kind of method of actually raising awareness. Currently, we see people are already aware, people are progressing. I think without emphasizing that this is something that's successful because it's a woman, I think people would validate Jacinda, for example, because New Zealand actually has this good kind of method to solve COVID-19 in New Zealand, all those things. I think that they have this huge burden, and it's something that's going to be worse under their side of the house. Moving on to my first case on how this contradicts our agenda as a feminist. What is our agenda as a feminist? Firstly, we want to protect women and we want to endorse equality. Secondly, we want to endorse equality, the narrative that women, any other gender on this earth, is same to men and it is not superior. Because when it's superior, then it's not feminism, ladies and gentlemen. It's called misandrist. This shows that the kind of narrative that they want to perpetuate is something that's harmful because principally you contradict your own stance as a feminist movement. The thing about a narrative is that it cannot only be interpreted in the way that you want. The moment, for example, you say that women, the moment that, for example, you validate women because they're good, it doesn't actually equate to them being better. People are not going to like strictly see this as that kind of narrative. Like the narrative that comes from for example, patriarchal society is going to be huge towards this. I think that standing for your stance to begin with is an obligation feminist movements have to fulfill. Secondly, why is this harmful? It's because you create generalization that all women are better. Understand the reason why women are currently oppressed is because there's this generalization that, for example, women are meek, women are soft, or for example, women are tender. That's why this kind of generalization exists and actually harms. In order for you to reach equality, feminist movements and women also should fend off this kind of unideal objectification of women, because not all women are the same. Exactly, feminists want to promote that women are actually good and women actually have the ability. They should fend off this unideal objectification that women are always perfect too. This kind of generalization also contradicts the male real kind of characteristics that in certain points that they can actually be good and they can actually have these kind of good policies. In order for you to have equality, you cannot be the same as the one that oppressed you in the past. Lastly, why our principle and why our kind of narrative is in line with the feminist movement agenda. Firstly, because we have fulfilled our obligation, which is to endorse equality, not misandrist or superiority towards certain genders. Secondly, because we're consistent, we stick to our stance. And lastly, we don't become an oppressor just because we've been oppressed. This in of itself proves to you that it's a principle justification that feminists have to fulfill. Moving on to the benefits and the impacts that's going to happen. What is going to happen the moment this happens? News media and journalists are going to create these kinds of news and reports. And what's going to happen is that they're going to compare different kinds of leaders and their ability, and for example, facing and actually dealing with COVID-19. The thing that's going to happen is that they're, for example, going to compare Jacinda, for example, with Xi Jinping, or for example, with Trump, or for example, with Jokowi, without actually understanding about the consideration inside the country. The moment you actually perpetuate narrative inside of the TV, not all people are educated. I told you before that the reason why Jacinda probably succeeded is because firstly, the people in New Zealand is already educated in of itself. But secondly, probably in New Zealand, people is also already privileged. People can actually access medication that's better. But thirdly, it's also because there's this kind of in these countries, the population are actually small. That's why it's probably easier for them to tackle these kinds of things. Ultimately, this kind of perpetuation is going to be worse. Why? Because you're going to create this narrative that men are bad. Man cannot actually fulfill and cannot actually handle COVID that exists inside your country. What's going to happen the moment that actually happens is that there's going to be hate and scrutiny from men the moment they're able to find out that not all women are better than men. How does this manifest? Firstly, critique towards women is going to be worse because you can use this narrative feminists insist on perpetuating as an ammunition to amplify your anger as a patriarchal society. And also, these kinds of even anti-feminist or patriarchal people can even research and find other examples of women that are not as good to retaliate and give like a bad example to the public that no, woman is actually bad. You cannot actually say that you're better. Under our said house, we say people understand and people are already progressing. Without actually emphasizing that this happens because they're a woman, people would still credit that these people are great, that these people have created change that's actually beneficial. Under our side, ultimately, we're still sticking to our principle. That's what's important in this debate. We're very proud to present.
We thank the first speaker of side opposition for that amazing speech. I call upon the second speaker of side proposition to continue this debate. Here.
Okay. For POIs, I would rather it from voice chat and unmuting yourself.
Sorry, I really need to pee. I have 1 minute before Johan starts his speech.
What? Sorry?
I have 1 minute before Johan starts his speech because I need to pee.
Oh yeah, it's okay. Take your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm great. Thank you.
Okay. The feminist movement should support a social narrative, especially if it directly empowers women and slowly curtails the narrative on women. We say feminist movement should support it, given that they're built to support women. We say regardless of them supporting it or not, it's the truth anyway, right? Women are better in handling these things. So before anything, I just want to point out that most of the core of their case was basically this characterization that men and how likely they're going to succumb into narratives if we perpetuate this narrative and how they're likely to criticize women, right? So I just want to point out that this is a classic argument to doing anything at all against anything at all as a woman. So their case was essentially self-defeating because no change can be made from both sides of the house if that was the characterization of men that they only wanted to defend. They need to argue on they only wanted to argue on their best case scenario. Note also importantly that they didn't even bother to explain about how natural change is going to work at all under their side of the house. Given that, I'm going to fill that hole, and most of the rebuttals will be integrated because they clash, right? So first of all, on the principle here, I think they come up here and tell you a very weak principle, which is, just because you are oppressed, you shouldn't oppress other people. I think like that line in and of itself was just problematic, because in principle, like I understand the notion coming from op, right? And I really like it, that we shouldn't devalue and condescend men under our side of the house. So like this is, okay, so looking at what men has done in the past, the disenfranchisement, the gender segregation and discrimination, the fact that these narratives that they wanted to talk about so much exist from men, we say it's okay because this is analogous to self-defense, and women have the rights to self-defend themselves from the patriarchal narrative that men create and perpetuate. They were culpable, right?
DKI,
Sure.
do you agree the disenfranchisement to men?
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat?
Do you agree if you disenfranchise men?
Yeah, but the problem here, women, just by saying that Jacinda Ardern does very good job, doesn't mean we're going to like disenfranchise men and put them out of position. Don't you think it's just like simply impossible to make men lower than women, given the history or like empirically what we've seen in status quo? So this was analogous to self-defense, right? Men creates and perpetuates the narrative. They were culpable. I know what their next response is. Oh, but who creates women oppression are men in the past, and these men currently are just continuing this oppression. Still, you benefit from that oppression. Men currently in status quo benefit, even though they didn't necessarily create the narrative, they still benefit from like the wage gap that corporations use. I just want to point out that this principle was directly contradictive. Okay, so their practical argument was to say that men will be angry, men will look at men as if they were lower. All of this suggests that men are culpable, therefore self-defending, and therefore condescending men, even to that extent, is still justified. I just think that their like principle and practical arguments just tension, right? So what are the questions I'm going to have in my speech? There are two questions here. Firstly, is this true that women leaders are better at handling COVID? And like, even if it's not true, how can we use this momentum as ammunition? Secondly, how will society react, the layer society? Firstly, is this true that women leaders are better at handling COVID? We suspect what they're going to say, and in fact, they already said it, are like conservatives are going to weaponize this because it's not true, it might be false, and it's like women aren't necessarily better. So what are the current empirical observations of male leaders and women leaders in the comparative? I'm going to be talking about popular male leaders, for this case, like Jokowi, Trump, Bolsonaro, Xi Jinping, and those come to mind, right? What are the common denominators? Four things. First of all, their strongman denies the existence or threat of COVID, for instance. They were unwilling to be consistent even when researchers say COVID is harmful, for instance, and shift their stance, right? But secondly, they have very little care on health and opens up economy. Thirdly, then, they have zero emotional affinity and ties with the population. They're likely to impose, like this strongman and like not close to, like they're not emotionally tied to the population. I just want to point out that empirically they have been doing slightly worse than women in handling this issue. So what's the unique characteristics of women leaders we're talking about? Jacinda Ardern, Merkel, like Mette Frederiksen from Denmark comes to mind, right? Empirically, there were four things here. Firstly, the respective country that they lead in is empirically well off. New Zealand, Denmark, Germany has low COVID transmission and overall infection. Secondly, these leaders are willing to engage, but like empirically, to the population, giving them a sense of embracement and hope, unlike the traditional like strongman, like hard to reach leaders. But they also don't make decisions easily, right? Thirdly, then, but just by the virtue of women being less egoistic and less aggressive than the current traditional like strongman leaders, that means they're likely to engage more to the society. Fourthly, then, the trend of progressive media, unlike their side of the house and what they say, we can weaponize this for the propagation to be able to like gain platform and propagate the idea that these leaders are nice, for instance. You have two responses to this here, right? The first one is that, like these narratives are bad, we shouldn't perpetuate it. Secondly, they're not really that good. New Zealand has low transmission rate because the people there are like educated. So the first one is that New Zealand is educated, therefore having low COVID transmission rate. So I just want to point out that exactly because New Zealand happens to be led by Jacinda Ardern and the fact that they're educated, we can weaponize this and we can utilize this in a positive way and say that Jacinda Ardern Jacinda Ardern is capable in doing these things in the worst case scenario. But secondly, I just don't know why the narrative of being like less egoistic and more engaging to the population or less aggressive is necessarily bad for for women at all, right? Next question then, how will the society react? So there are three types of society here that I'm going to talk about. First one, liberals, second middle ground, then conservatives, right? I think liberals are very likely to pitch in this movement and support this movement, because they're liberals, right? But secondly then, middle ground people, this is why we win the debate. Because currently when the situations are so desperate, it's human nature to find actors that are culpable for their desperation times. That's why we utilize the emotion to validate the fact that men aren't always the best leaders. Middle ground people are likely to support this feminist movement as well, because they'll slowly realize, oh, it might be true that men leaders aren't always as good, because look, now my country is dying economically and my president does very little to nothing to try to uplift, to try to hear us, for instance. This gives more trust, like slowly more trust to women leaders, right? So if they want to say that their response was like, this is going to people in the middle ground people or conservative people are going to like try to criticize Jacinda Ardern or other women leaders. I don't think this is possible in this, given the context we're facing COVID. I don't think this is possible for you to criticize those things, given that you have troubles. For instance, you have trouble, you get laid off for work. The more natural human response is to find someone that you can blame for it, which is the male leaders. So this is how we get traction under our side of the house. Thirdly, then the conservatives. They will criticize us regardless, right? That's firstly. But secondly, we know what they're going to say, that these leaders are failed, conservatives are going to criticize this. We're going to tell you that it's okay because we can counter the narrative by pinpointing what male leaders have done in the comparative to these women leaders, especially when we have a lot of examples of Trump's blunder, for instance. For all of those reasons, I'm so proud to propose.
We thank the second speaker of side proposition for that amazing speech. I call upon the second speaker of side opposition. Here.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, cool. Give me a second. Preparing my timer. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Inclusivity is the center of feminism. When Johan told you that women are better than men, we say that's firstly morally inconsistent with what women want. That is equality. We don't want to be superior. We want to be equal with men. But secondly, it perpetuates inequality that will destroy any improvement feminist movement have tried to make in status quo. In order to win, government team have to explain to you why it's moral and justified for feminist movement to sacrifice their consistency regarding gender equality when they support the superiority of women against men, when this narrative is happening, when they support this narrative. By supporting this narrative, we say it's convenient for opposition team to say this. It's inconsistent. Populist stand will win you this debate. If we can prove to you that A, incremental change is worth the time compared to risky momentum that will destroy feminist movement, and B, feminist movement should stick to their equality, gender equality, rhetorics and narrative, we win this debate. Now, 3 points I'm going to address in this debate. Firstly, consistency of principle. Secondly, is it true that women are better at leading COVID? But thirdly, how this narrative will be unsustainable or my extension compared to our alternative narrative. First point, consistency of principle. We told you in Jere that principle is really important to be consistent because it will be one of the promotion of that feminist movement promotes gender equality. That's to say we don't want to oppress men. We want to be equal with men. We don't want to make men look bad just because we are better and so on and so forth. The response we only got from Johan was that, oh, women have been really disenfranchised, which is true. But this does not negate any kinds of consistency on principle because they never explain to you why it's okay to be inconsistent, especially feminist movement have been really good at their movement exactly because they've been consistent with being equal to men. But I want to point out their half stance when I flag to the BOI. They do not support this enfranchisement to men, but they support superiority of women. So we question the case of their supporting, because the moment they're supporting women, they're going to alienate men even more. I'm going to extend how this happened later. But we told you that feminist is about equality. They never explained why this equality narrative should be destroyed for like the sake of momentum of COVID. Because understand, what's most important is to explain that, look, COVID-19 is a hard thing to handle, for example, right? Exactly because there are a lot of people who fails exactly because of their, like, the meritocracy of people who succeed is really good. This is what we want. What is that? That is that women is hardworking. Women are competent in their job, not because they're generalized, because they're kind and nurturing. Because understand there's spectrum of women. That's to say, there's women who are also fierce. There's women who are also really good at leading, for example, who are assertive. This is the narrative that we want, that women is spectrumized and not nurturing and caring and nice and all that, because this will be generalizing every kinds of things that we want to show to you. This will be a backlash to feminist movement, because why these leaders can be really nurturing, but feminist movement is so aggressive. This will be backlash to the feminist movement. When we told you that feminist movement has spectrum, we have liberal feminism, we have Marxist liberalism, we have radical feminism. This is what we want in status quo, which is spectrum of feminism. When you try to alienate those kinds of spectrum, you're going to alienate your own followers, you're going to alienate your own supporters when you only support women that are not nurturing, or the narrative that women are caring and whatnot. So we don't want this consistency of principle to continue. In conclusion, they fail proving on inconsistency of principle. Second point, is it true that women are better at leading COVID? They told you, right? Oh yes, because A, B, C, D. We don't think it's true. Why? Because most journalists and political and medical experts later rely on assumptions and anecdotes about female leadership to support their claim. Why? Because countries that they lead is developed countries, ladies and gentlemen, like New Zealand, like Taiwan. We think that they are already competent in itself. The government is not as corrupt as Indonesia, for example. The government is not as corrupt as America. What this proves to you? It proves to you that their competence is not only because of them itself, but also because of the country in itself. So we cannot just like claim that, oh, it's because the women in itself. It's also because the people listen to them. It's also because of like women who support them behind their back, for example, and so on and so forth. Like, but my question will be, can women become competent in their leadership regardless of the generalized stereotype? Yes. And why? Because there are countries like Japan and Singapore with men leaders that can operate in a really good COVID-19 situation, for example. We say, like, why is it so bad? Because in news media, for example, right, women like Angela Merkel and all that is portrayed and compared to people like Trump and Jokowi, obviously it's going to be really bad, right? What we want is they are compared with people like leaders of Singapore and Japan when they are both competent in their job. This is the one what we want. Why? Because it proves to you that women can be as equal as men at handling COVID-19, for example. This is going to not happen inside the house. When you keep alienating people like Trump and Jokowi, that is a portrayal of men leaders in the world, right? So in conclusion, is it true that women are good? Yes, but it doesn't mean that women are better than men. No. Third point, how this narrative is unsustainable and compared to other alternative, but I'll take a POI.
Okay, so we're not necessarily saying women are better. Our entire case was to say that portraying and framing as if women leaders are better can slowly drive the gender narrative that exists.
One, that's how stands. Two, you literally said it in your opening speech that women are better. So moving on to my third point. How this narrative unsustainable compared to our narrative. In recent months, mainstream media had excessively covered the story of how women-led countries had fared better in executing pandemic response. That means mainstream media that's endorsed by feminist movement and liberals will constantly cover on this issue. The claims are female are humble, female are diverse viewpoints, female are not constrained by traditional trappings of leadership, they are more accepting of science and more and hands-on. Why is it so bad? However, most journalists and political don't think this is true because there's no science background. What does this mean? This assumption can be utilized by anti-feminist and misogynist media, nor people that supports the media to amplify the hatred against women and the feminist women. Who are they? They are men's rights activists that is valid. There are anti-feminist activists. How this illustrates in real life? It's the manifestation of hatred towards feminist women for years, or to women who don't abide to their wants and needs, women who don't want to listen to their misogynistic needs. In instances when feminists say we want equality, the response will be, so I can hit women? This proves to you that these actors are reactive, hot-headed to the small things and sensitive regarding man discrimination. But why is it their incentive to do so, right? Their incentive is to destroy any kinds of rhetoric that indicates attack to men. Even though the smallest narrative that women are better at handling COVID indicates that it's better, men are worse at handling COVID, right? But why is it problematic, right? Because these people who are existing in the middle ground, they're trying to claim time when they told you we want to get middle ground beliefs and viewpoints. But why do they exist in middle ground? Why? Because most of these people are conservative people who were born in a conservative family, exist majority in the US, for example, who exist majority in Indonesia. So the liberals are smaller in terms of number. But why do they indicate as narrative as an attack? This explicitly show that women leaders are better in managing the COVID outbreak compared to men, which indicates that men is less. This is an offense to these people when they hear that, oh, women are better at COVID-19. This is a direct attack. But why is it bad? Because these people dominate most governments, they dominate most households, they dominate most institutions. This narrative will not be sustainable because there's going to be media that makes the left more go leftist and the rightists to go more even rightist, right? Like anti-feminist media like Fox News. These media companies, Republicans and rightist source of news. This means that any kinds of negative rhetoric that's exposed, such as these women are leading countries that are already anti-corruption, which is kind of weird, that are already developed, thus it's invalid. But when they try to do dangerous proving, like women are failing their governance during COVID-19, for example, what's happening in Indonesia when Ratna failed to handle Surabaya, right? Once this historical momentum is cancelled by these people, this will be a momentum of shame and inconsistency as the feminist movement. But why alternative is better than Sarata House? Because our alternative is support that women is competent and can be as competent as men. We think this is a incremental change that we need to take rather than taking a risky, dangerous change and that will create a really huge outbreak in terms of hate of feminism. We're so proud to oppose.
We thank the second speaker of side opposition for that amazing speech. I call upon the third speaker of side proposition to continue this debate. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Okay, I'm setting up my timer. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So let's get to the bottom of this, because you're questioning about the value of feminism itself, right? Well, we tell you that the reason a feminist movement is created in the first place is because of females are oppressed. It's because they want the vote to they want to have the same right to vote as men. It is not to uplift men who are at the lowest, but rather to uplift women that those that are oppressed from the past. It is basically the principle of feminism itself, which is what we're trying to uphold. It is to fight the oppressor and in order to prove that they are wrong. That is the basic narrative of feminism itself. So there are two questions into this debate I would like to bring. So the first of all is how will society react, and second of all, how should we take the opportunity or not? So into the first question. They told you that there will still be incels, right? There will still be misogynists that would hate on this woman that are successful in handling COVID-19 cases. Well, I say that it is fine. What are they fighting for? They're fighting for the facts. They're fighting for the empirical data that proves that actually currently the women leaders are better handling COVID and males leader like Donald Trump. I say it is fine. It makes them look stupid because what they're fighting for is simply not true. We tell you that our narrative makes more sense in this case. So they also told you that in this case that the way that they frame the debate is that these female leaders are being overgeneralized as to being object for feminism in order to gain fame. Well, we tell you that these female leaders actually fight for the position, and they actually earn these compliments. They actually earn in managing the COVID-19 cases. We tell you that the reason Jacinda Ardern was re-elected is because of her handling in COVID-19. We see that is one of the main heavy consideration into the people of New Zealand, and I say that it is not just because the people are educated. It is basically an overgeneralization of the case. Secondly, regarding this question, actually, I think they need to fact check about the Taiwan's president, right? Because they told you that the Taiwanese president, which is a female, is only capable of doing that just because their country is developed, for example. Well, what if I tell you that just because they're developed does not mean that they don't have the negative effects of potentially spreading the virus even further, because as we know that Taiwan is sprawled, it has slums, and it is basically people living in close quarters. So it is quite an achievement that they have managed to shift that independent from China, right, from the main government. I think they do deserve this. If they want to fight examples, we win on that as well. So We tell you that it is not an objectification of women. It is not an objectification of the female agenda or whatever they're trying to tell you. We tell you that this is actually a way for us to show, because people learn by showing. People know by examples that are provided by their handling of the cases. We tell you it is the most effective way because it is the only way. It is the only opportunity that people will get. It is like a once in 100 years opportunity that we will never get again. So we tell you that it also matters, right? They tell you that people in the middle ground doesn't matter because they're basically just people that is less sexist, for example. Well, we tell you that it's a wide spectrum. The people there is just not simply basically neutral mindless robots. We are aware of that, and what if we tell you that the people in the ground at the very least is not are patriarchal as those of the right wing? It means that there's still a chance for them to listen to our message, and it is way better instead of your incremental change, because we see that message is message is present, and it is done in the worst of moments. It sort of gives the message in the darkest moments, right? So yes.
Sir, when rightist media expose women and make them look bad, how are you going to react to that?
Right wing media is always going to be there, right? We can't oppress right wing media because clearly is out of the debate. Which means that just because it exists, just because all they say it exists, doesn't mean that it is necessarily true. Just let them scream whatever they want, as long as it is not true. I don't think it's a big of a problem at all. I don't think it will harm the feminist movement because what they're saying is empirically true. So people won't react, nonsensically and basically blame the feminists on spreading false agenda. I don't know. There's not even a logical process provided by them in this example, right? We tell you that the leaders matters, and it's just about time that people in the United States, like for example, like Trump, the strongman figures actually listens, or basically because they would see this as a form of criticism, because as my second speaker told you about, it is a direct hit to this strongman agenda, which as we know that the strongman figures hates to be criticized at, right? They hate to be told what to do, and they are often rigid in their ruling. And this is actually a indirect form of criticizing, because we see that they're trying to frame this debate as if we're trying to tell women that we are generous, or we are basically telling women that women are caring and women are like a mom figure, right? No, that is not necessarily true, because we're telling that women are capable of handling the things are better than men. Why is that so hard to understand? I believe that it is not just because women are caring, but just because it also because of the fact that they're better leaders in this case, right? We are not necessarily saying that they are basically caring. So if only compared to the worst of men, I believe we've catered to the middle ground people all the same. We tell you that we tell you that they can still be swayed, and we tell you that even if the media success, it wouldn't fully, the people wouldn't just listen to it. So secondly, should we take the opportunity or not? We tell you that this opportunity is a very rare opportunity. They try to tell you that this opportunity is the one that will harm the feminist agenda, just because these countries are developed and these countries is not simply the one to take examples of. We tell you that it is important because in these exact countries, in these exact developed countries, is that the cases and handling of the virus is bad. We tell you that there are people out there, females out there, that is capable of handling the country better in COVID-19 than your current leader, which you live in your privileged first world country, for example, right? We tell them that narrative, and it is important for them to consider, right? So we tell you should take the opportunity, because this will never come again. Because at the end of the day, the one that will sway them is a direct narrative in which that would tell everyone that there exists a female leader that doesn't need the patriarchy at all, a female leader that is there to lead the people in the worst of moments. Because we see that there's empirical data about it, and it is simply true. It is what they should have engaged as. It's not the fact that the data is there and it's true. So we tell you that at the end of the day, it is way better. So into the final an extra question, right? So does this fit the feminism itself or not? as I told you in my opening speech, that the reason the feminist movement is created is because they've been oppressed so long. They try to tell you that feminism only exists in order to create equality. I don't think that is necessarily the case, especially in this debate, because we see now that there's a patriarchal agendas. There are patriarchal basically narrative that supports that men is better at leading people than women. We tell you that this basically narrative is simply not true. We want to empower women. We tell you that the best way to empower women is through this. It's through this way in which that delivering the narrative that all the women would want to hear. They're tired of being told that they cannot be a leader. They're tired that they're being told of they're not wise enough to be a leader. We're so proud to propose. Thank you.
We thank the third speaker of side proposition for that amazing speech. I call upon the third speaker of side opposition to continue this debate. Here.
Excuse me, my third speaker is going to the toilet for 1 minute.
Yeah,
If you
it's
don't
okay.
mind.
Take your time.
Okay, thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition wants to talk about the problems that women face in the status quo, which is intuitive. But they never proved to you how they were going to get any change on their side the moment we told you that there was levy of heavy criticism against you. Precisely, I don't think you should just do something just for the sake of it. Team proposition cannot win this debate. I'm going to ask 2 questions in my speech. First of which, on the principle basis, with the interest of the feminist movement and how we benefit women, but secondly, on how you garner support from the feminist movement and how society will react. But before that, 3 points of framing as to why team proposition already lose this debate. First, the portrayal that they want to push is inherently untrue. That there are men who are doing well in handling this pandemic, that this portrayal was never based on empirical data. But it was not inherent for you to become a woman, that there were externalities that dictate whether or not you were going to be successful or not. But this narrative picks and chooses certain types of women and certain types of men and compares them to each other. But secondly, proposition took a half stance the moment they said this portrayal was only going to say that women are good and not going to degrade men, for example, and say men are bad. They cannot get away by simply saying, we're just going to say Jacinda Ardern does a very good job. On their side, the facts are there, okay, but they have to connect it to you being a woman, because this shows that you undercut your own benefit the moment you don't connect it to the inherence of becoming a woman. Because status quo is already progressing, as they said, because women are already in parliament, for example. This shows to you that they need to prove some significant benefit, but by proving that there is an inherent correlation to you becoming a woman, right? But precisely, the context slide crucially says that this was a current narrative that's happening right now, but they never engaged with how the narrative was actually going to look like when they supported. What they had to defend was a narrative that says this, that journalists and experts will rely, no thank you, on anecdotes about women's leadership. That if you go to news sites, the coverage that exists was about female leaders becoming more kind, more nurturing, and more accepting of science. This is the one that's empirically true, because you see this in a lot of news media right now. I don't know if team proposition just doesn't look at the news, right? But for all their benefits to run, they must defend this narrative exclusively. 2 reasons. First, because the motion literally states so. Precisely, if you're going to say that women are better leaders, that means it implies that men are worse leaders. So there's an active arbitration of which one is better over the other. But secondly, their benefits of changing the perception of women rely on the sole inherence. On our side, garnering support can happen when you show off the hard work of these women, when you say that they can be equal to men, not necessarily superior. They need to defend the trade-off here, but unfortunately, it's too late. But thirdly, they never actually prove their own burden because they claim, and I quote first speaker, that they want to eradicate the patriarchy by through things such as voting, for example. But by their third speaker, we never get a mechanization of change. It went from having a narrative to suddenly voting for pro-women policy. I don't see the link. So first clash then on the principal obligation of the feminist movement and benefits to women. No, thank you. They talk about how this is going to be a push and a momentum for you to do change, right? First, this claim is inherently reliant on the pragmatic benefits of this motion, which I think they have not sufficiently proven. That is to say, we should not just do something just for the sake of it. The second extension of this claim was that, oh, you will have more trust to women and you will vote based on policies. One, they undercut their own benefit by saying that women are already normal in status quo, for example, women in parliament. And this is empirically true. This shows to you that women are already accessing higher positions of power and trust is put into them. But that means that whatever benefit they get by this extra narrative is only marginal compared to the criticism that happens. This means any of their benefits cannot run. Secondly, I don't see why they will suddenly, like these people will suddenly vote for policies that are pro-women just because this narrative exists. Because realize that the narrative on your side is that women should be put into positions of power, that they're inherently better. This means that people are still going to be likely to vote based on arbitrary characteristics, not based on policies, if that's what you guys want on your side of the house. The only principal justification for this was that, this was analogous to self-defense. This is bizarre because realize that this is dependent on you, like doing self-defense by actually changing the system, but not self-harming yourself by destroying your own movement. It affects your public image because you alienate your supporters that you do have no engagement from third speaker. But Jared told you that staying consistent with our principles was necessary. And this should be weighed more in this debate because women have become victims of generalization in the past, generalized as too emotional. But precisely, we cannot do that same generalization elsewhere because you're also generalizing the type of women that will be successful. You do an active arbitration or an active prioritization of certain capabilities of certain women versus certain men. By generalizing that all women are good, you generalize that all men are worse off in terms of COVID-19 handling, which is empirically untrue. But they're also correlating the certain characteristics that women have, for example, being humble or being kind, to the success that they have. Crucially, we told you that there were two harms of this. First, that you limit the choice of several women because not all women's leadership styles are like that. That ultimately you are undercutting your own benefit of actually supporting the type of women when there are a spectrum of women which you guys want to talk about. But secondly, you alienate the supporters of the different branches of feminism because they are no longer always going to be linked to the type of humble characteristic, for example, or the type of humble portrayal that will happen on your side. What is the impact of this? You are principally consistent, but being principally consistent is important because one, you need to have supporters, but secondly, it leaves you less room from being attacked from conservatives, for example. There's less room for you to be criticized, etc. Second clash then on garnering the support of women. The biggest claim coming from them was that we get middle ground people. And crucially, this is the only thing that came on their side that amounts to a benefit. First, this was not true. Given that there is a rising conservative waves and a rise in right-wing populism, I don't see why middle ground people will suddenly go one way if we accept their characterization that patriarchy was already so entrenched in society, then I don't see why the instinctual reaction was not going to be something that was deviating from patriarchy, deviating for something that they see was normal. The only thing they get was that, oh, these people will go like women because they are desperate. Okay, but given the prevalence of right-wing media, which they conceded, the narrative is precisely easily swayed because this is a narrative. The interpretation of this is not consistent. They want to say that these people are gray area and spectrum. We characterized to you that they were likely going to fall to the conservative side. They were going to, like, for example, find out if this was true at all. But thirdly, let's say it was all true. They never proved to you why people were going to be so rational. Because if the technique on your side was to use inflammatory tactics and narratives, then it thinks the same thing happens with this right-wing media and right-wing populism that exists in these countries. The second claim they want to say here was that we can counter conservatives by mobilizing liberals. But I don't see how it will work the other way around until you actually get change. Because given that you concede that you mobilize both left and right, both liberals and conservatives, I don't see how there will be any productive change in society the moment you guys only want to be oppositional to each other and conservatives, for example, don't want to compromise. But precisely, it was harmful when you mobilize even feminist supporters and people who are oppositional to this party. What will happen then on your side of the house, and what does it mean for the movement? One, there will be massive critique towards women, and this can be used as ammunition. It was a straw man for them to say that, oh, these people cannot criticize Jacinda Ardern. This is true, but they will criticize the feminist movement as a whole, or they will find specific examples of women who can undercut the claims made by the feminist movement. You actively undercut the narrative of this being beneficial by perpetuating it to begin with. Precisely, the counter works both ways. But this was crucial. The reason why they cannot simply say that, oh, we can just counter them with a liberal push, was that the conservative people were people in power. That they wasn't like, the patriarchy was so entrenched, coming from the extension of my second speaker, precisely why the narrative was unsustainable. Because these are people who are in power, who have control over policies, who have control over parliament. What happens then on our side of the house? We should get incremental change by showing that women can be equal, that they have the same capabilities, not their superior, and not inflammatory to these status quo. But in our worst case scenario, let's say you don't do anything at all, you don't actively make the situation worse, and this was detrimental to the progress that already exists. Team opposition wins.
We thank the third speaker of side opposition for that amazing speech, just ending the substantive part of the speeches. We would like to call upon the reply speaker of side opposition to close the case overall. Here.
Check, am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Give me a second. Okay. I'm going to start my speech. 3, 2, 1. It's a shame for Team Bali to assume that they can get away with the jargonistic populist rhetorics just because their stance sounds intuitive without explaining that A, it's justified for feminist movement to sacrifice their value regarding equality for this movement and narrative, but secondly, how they're going to make sustainable change of narrative that supports women after COVID-19. They failed. They already lost this debate the moment their first speaker skipped the most important principal ground of equality to oppressed men. But moreover, I'm going to explain to you 2 reasons why we should win this debate based on 2 clashes. First clash, regarding moral grounds and principle grounds of feminist movement, right? They only claim about why is it justified is because men have been oppressing women. Obviously, we agree to that. That is really bad. But in our side of the house, opposition team believes that feminist movement should be consistent with their values. Why? Because that value is the one who drives feminist movement to its success, explained by myself in second speaker speech. But moreover, my first speaker have also already told you that equality is really important. Why? Because women were oppressed by men exactly because they thought they were superior. This is going to happen inside of the house when the narrative is exchanged into women is more superior than men. This cycle will not end. The cycle will be really bad. This was never responded by side proposition. This claim still exists until to this day. But moreover, we told you that women, in order to achieve equality and to achieve support and in principle and value, is to say to achieve equality. That's to say to be as equal as men. In this narrative, it's obvious for a lot of people that women sounds better. That the portrayal is women is better at men regarding handling of COVID. This is problematic. Why? Because the generalization that is used, that's like, for example, women are nurturing, women are smarter in science, and so on and so forth, is being used to attack against men exactly. And what happens in the past when the good characterization and stereotype that men use is that like man is better at leading, man is smarter, and so forth. That's explained by my first speaker. Is really problematic, right? Because we understand both of these narratives for women and men is really good. But the problem here is that the generalization is dangerous to each other. This promotes oppression and suppression against each other's gender. So our moral obligation to stick with our consistency still stand to this day, because we have reasonably explained to you why being morally consistent in feminist movement is really important. Moreover, there's no response why it's not important inside government, right? But second clash, how this will benefit women and so on and so forth. They told you that this momentum will create a narrative change. But they never explain why this momentum translates to sustainable change of narrative when it's easily diminished by existing anti-feminist actors that we have characterized to you. Moreover, we told you this will destroy feminist movement for four reasons. Firstly, it's contingent to certain externalities that not women have, like a good country, good citizens, and supportive people behind them. Moreover, more conservative and misogynist people exist in status quo, thinks that women shouldn't be equal. They dominate the governance institution. This will be a huge backlash when they are exposing women as not as incompetent, for example, like it's happening in like Surabaya. But fourthly, literally alienating their feminist movement are literally alienating their own supporters when they generalize that the best kinds of women are these leaders that are nurturing and caring and believing in science. They alienate traditional feminism. They alienate literally every kind of feminism that exists and support us, which is really important in a status quo, right? But why is it so bad to lose followers? That means that we're losing people that cares about us, explained by second speaker. But moreover, this create backlash to incompetent women will be worse, which means that it's going to be a backlash to the entire feminist movement. We told you we support these kind of leaders. But secondly, misogynist becomes more misogynist with the existence of right-wing media, because this doesn't mean that they are eradicated just because there are liberal medias, right? This was never responded by government team why suddenly misogynists will become like understanding to feminist movement. But thirdly, they never engage in their own worst case scenario when this momentum fails and create a shame to their own movement, knowing that there are women leaders that are not competent, such as like Angela Merkel and so on and so forth. Our worst case scenario is that we're not going to create a big change, but at least we're not going to risk the entire feminist movement by creating and narrating this narrative we're so proud to post.
We would like to thank the reply speaker of side opposition. To end this debate overall, I would like to call the reply speaker of side proposition. Here.
Am I audible? I'm switching my camera.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Their side of the house says that men